The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Peter Beinart's a senior political writer for the Daily Beast, also associate professor of journalism and political science at the City University of New York, and senior fellow at the New America Foundation. Hey, Peter, thanks for calling in.
My pleasure.
Hey, so I'm from Argentina originally, and there's certainly some of the same liberal, anti-Israeli sentiment that there is in the U.S., but overall, the idea that liberalism is associated with a very particular view on the Israeli-Palestine situation was kind of new to me when I moved here. How did that develop?
Well, I think in the United States, at least, the whole history of American Zionism has been liberal in the sense that the idea of what a Jewish state would be was always that it would be a democratic Jewish state, which, in the words of Israel's Declaration of Independence, offered full political and social equality to all people, regardless of religion, race, or sex. And if you look at people like Louis Brandeis, who's an important American Zionist, this was very much the conception that they had. So I believe historically, actually, Zionism has been a liberal idea in the United States.
Yeah, and it seems a lot of people also forget, I mean, the first Prime Minister of Israel, David Ben-Gurion, was a socialist, was he not?
Yes, I mean, a lot of the early leaders of Zionism were socialists and had a kind of a lot of skepticism towards capitalism. That's tended, as socialism has kind of faded in its various forms around the world, it tended to fade in Israel as well. But no, those are very much at the at the heart of the most important founders of the State of Israel and their supporters in the United States.
Is there a place in the U.S. for a kind of middle of the road, like somebody like me? So, for example, when I watch Sean Hannity and the religious right talk about Israel, I'm not on board there, and I'm certainly not on board with a lot of what's on the left-wing media either, just very, very anti-Israel, almost downright anti-Semitic in some cases. Some people say it's J Street. I mean, where is that kind of middle-of-the-road place in the U.S.?
Well, I'm honestly not, for myself, particularly interested in finding the middle of the road place. For me, the what matters is a vision, supporting a vision of Israel, which I think is in keeping with those ideals in Israel's Declaration of Independence. I think the problem is, or at least one important problem, is that in 1967, Israel occupied territories to which it did not apply those principles. So that while Israel is a democracy within its 1967 borders, and that's one of the reasons I'm proud to consider myself a Zionist, in the West Bank you have 500,000 Jews who have the right to vote, surrounded by 2 or 2.5 million Palestinians who don't have the right to vote. Mm-hmm. And that seems to me a real problem if you take pride in the idea of Israel as a country that will be a democratic Jewish state.
I agree with you 100%. And I think, would you agree with me that a lot of the problem, or maybe at least some of the problem in the discussion that goes on in the U.S. is, for example, if somebody hears you say you are a Zionist, there is immediately one association made with that, and what you say after does not even matter. And then at the same time, if somebody hears you criticize some of what's going on in the West Bank, for example, it's assumed that you are on another side. It's become very black and white when that's not the case. Is that not right?
Yeah, these discussions bring up a lot of passion amongst Jews and amongst non-Jews, certainly amongst Palestinians. But for me, the critical question, particularly if you're someone who loves Israel, is what kind of Israel do you want this to be? And I think there are genuine, very serious threats to Israeli democracy that come from now having occupied a piece of territory where you don't extend democracy now for 2/3 of Israel's entire existence.
That's right. Now, when I hear you say that, I'm very, right away, I think our audience, which is mostly a liberal audience, is going to think that you are blindly supporting what Israel is doing, with a small caveat saying that, well, it would be better if democracy was extended. I have not successfully found a way to break through what is the stereotype of somebody who calls himself either a Zionist or a supporter of Israel among the American progressives, for example. How can that be done? Help me do that.
I think there's a little bit of an analogy between, the waving the flag in the United States or calling yourself a patriot. Sometimes when that happens, because you see Fox News always, flying the flag everywhere, people think, oh, you're a right-winger. But, Norman Thomas, who was a great American Democratic Socialist leader, said famously once, "Don't burn the flag, wash it." And I said, for me, that's the kind of way I try to think about American patriotism and also about Zionism, which is to say, don't give up the notion of love and attachment and loyalty just because others use that as a cloak for jingoism and racism and illiberal sentiments. Claim it and define it in your terms.
What do you think is the next step with peace talks or potential peace talks? What makes sense anyway to you?
I have to say one. I think it would have to be very pessimistic at this point. I think you have a weak government in the West Bank amongst the Palestinians, and I think you have a government in Israel that is genuinely not really interested in doing what it would require to create a Palestinian state. So I think it's going to be a question of whether President Obama is willing to take the political flack that would be required for him to essentially put a U.S. proposal on the table, because I think that's probably the only kind of thing that might really galvanize the discussions beyond where we are now.
Do you think, and I don't know that any of us really know the answer to this, that the Obama administration might see it as politically risky, given some of the trouble they're already having, to be in some way associated with the Netanyahu administration in Israel?
I actually think that my sense is that for them, the bigger fear is the political risk of putting pressure on Netanyahu, because that produces a very, very hostile response from the organized American Jewish community and from a lot of evangelical Christians, and particularly with Republicans in Congress. I think they can make life difficult for Obama. I think that's very unfortunate. I think it's for me as an American Jew. I think it's pretty tragic that American Jewish organizations make it difficult for the United States to really pressure Israel on its policies on the West Bank, because I think Israel's policies in the West Bank are utterly destructive to Israel and to Jewish life.
We mentioned in the last couple of minutes we have, a few days ago we talked about the 2022 World Cup going to Qatar. And somebody emailed me saying, forget about the women's rights issues that exist there. Qatar, under normal circumstances, does not allow Israelis into the country. Israel's World Cup team or soccer team probably wouldn't make it anyway. But at the same time, they may allow people in for special occasions, special events type of thing. What's your reaction to having the World Cup at a country like that, given that policy?
Well, I think those policies are really troubling and problematic. And you have this issue in any time you're dealing with a non-democratic country. With China, you'll have it with Russia. And I think the debate then becomes, is there any possibility that by having these games there, you could actually promote change, progressive change, or are you better off doing it by taking a really hard line? And I think that's a kind of tactical question about which I don't necessarily know enough in the case of Qatar, but I would certainly say that we should make it our business to try to change those policies, whether we do it by participating in the games or being opposed to them.
Yeah, the consensus among my audience, which of course is their opinion I take very seriously, is that the idea of influencing change by having the World Cup there is really just not going to happen, and that we're better off not getting into that type of situation. But as you said, no real 100% answer on that right now.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to know, and look, there's just also a certain there's a limit to the U.S. power. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know whether, let's say, if the U.S. were to boycott this kind of thing, it probably wouldn't have a lot of impact unless we were able to convince other countries to do it too.
We've been speaking with Peter Beinart, of course, from the New America Foundation, also professor at City University of New York. Peter, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, Louis, let's take a break. We'll be back with more after this. Plenty more stories, and of course, a lot more on davidpakman.com. Stay tuned.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.